Welcome back to another episode of the Club Cultivate Podcast. Today's guest has been one that I have been waiting to have on the podcast for a while. She's a wealth of knowledge, and when I think about people in the ag and Western spaces that are creatives, I wanted to get a variety of people that are specialized and people that have a breadth of knowledge. But Monica Hild is joining us today, and she'll be very great at sharing a lot of specific information when it comes to photographing sheep in particular. So Monica, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Whitney. It's a pleasure.
I want to dive on in. Like I mentioned before when we were talking, I think that this will be a very tactical episode for people to take home lots of tips and tricks. And ultimately, I'm a believer of, what's the quote, rising tides lifts all ships. And so we, especially as creatives that see other people's work, know that it is fun to see other people improve. So hopefully today's conversation will do that. But let's go back in time just a little bit. I know you have a fun story of how you got started. So if you would, please share your story of how you were given a camera and how you ended up taking photos of sheep.
Sure. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. But basically, I did not grow up around the show lamb, club lamb industry whatsoever. I actually grew up showing horses. I went to Iowa State, majored in animal science, pre-vet, met my husband, Charlie. We did not date in college, but we were pretty good friends. And then I went and I worked for Elanco Animal Health, and I was in R&D, very sciencey, very kind of in that mindset. Once Charlie and I kind of started dating, got married, he had the club lamb industry, and it was around that time in like 17 to 2018 when more online sales were starting to pop up, and we were marketing more sheep, and we just needed a way to market our animals better than the typical, just like old school digital tiny camera that we used to take to the bars with us, right? So we looked into it, and at that time, there were not a lot of livestock photographers out there. I mean, there were, but they were very cattle focused. And I think in the sheep and goat realm, there was maybe only one out there that would do sheep. And so Charlie basically was like, Merry Christmas. Here is the camera, DSLR, with the 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And he's like, our first online sale is in February. So you need to learn that in roughly a month and a half. So that was really daunting. And I have always been creative in a sense where I can see what I want in my mind, but me actually getting an actual product in front of me for others to view was always a challenge because I'm not an artist, I'm not a graphic designer, and I am just a very sciencey minded person, right? So it was a challenge, and I just remember like holding this massive camera and being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So a lot of YouTube at the time. There was no like how to livestock take livestock photos. It was a lot of like, here's a moose in Alaska, and I am taking a picture of this wildlife. So I had followed a lot of wildlife photographers, and just trial and error, and then just growing from there and improving every time I picked up the camera. And that's kind of where I am today in a nutshell.
I really love the just like trial by doing or you thrown into the fire because I think there's a lot of people that are perfectionists on the other end of the spectrum that are like, I'm never going to share anything. But you had a need, and especially when it's, I guess, part of a business, you're like, we're just going to figure out how to do this and know that you're not going to be an expert right away, but figure it out. Like, that's just part of the process, right?
Yeah, and it helped that I couldn't get in my own head because I knew we had an online sale coming up and I had a deadline. So I had to learn it. And I knew it wasn't going to be perfect, but I had to be happy with what we had because it was a lot better than what we had previously. So just, yeah, each time we took pictures, it was growth, tears, more pictures, growth, tears, in that order. So it worked out.
So if I think there's two different scenarios of people that we can be talking to today. Those that market livestock, their business, etc., and know that photography is a part of that, whether that's even truthfully an iPhone or camera. But then there's the other side of photographers wanting to get better in this realm. But I guess if someone, or if you were to go back and given that camera several years ago, and if this was someone else, I guess what do you think now, looking back, is the first thing that you would have done to learn how to take better photos?
Definitely, I think regardless of what type of photography you're doing, whether that's livestock photography, in ring photography, newborn people, seniors, whatever, just learning the principles of photography, principles of light and how that affects photography, and how to properly use your camera is just where you have to start, regardless of what your end goal is. And it's so important because in livestock photography, any photography, you're thrown into very many different lighting situations, weather situations, where you have to be able to know your camera, adapt to the situation. So I think just learning the gear you have, and you don't have to have like super expensive gear. I mean, you can start out with the pretty basic things, because those basic fundamentals with your basic gear is just, it's the same with the other gear that you're going to move up to. So just gaining that basic knowledge will help just accelerate whichever path you're going down.
Knowing that you started with wildlife and that's been several years, so I'm sure there's things out there. Do you have recommendations on where people can learn even just basic camera settings? Like, have you found anything, or is that several years ago and things have just changed since then?
I think now, I mean, everything is available on the internet for free. And if you just go onto YouTube and you type in like DSLR, like camera settings for portraiture, you'll get the basic knowledge of what you need to take pictures, indoor, outdoors, wherever you're going. So pretty much everything is on YouTube. And at that time, in 2017, I had to cherry pick what was applicable to me. So yes, I watched a lot of stuff on people photos, but they were doing a lot of backlight situations and a ton of stuff that I'm not actually implementing in livestock photography. So I had to, take a bit here, and then I'd watch the lives or the wildlife photography, and I'd take a bit there, and I try to combine them into a recipe that worked for my particular situation. But I know now there's, courses online that you can watch, and tons of people on Facebook and Instagram have like just little tidbits here and there that they put up daily, and just those things. It's been really helpful that this wasn't available back when I started.
Do you think people can get away with auto settings if you were like, I know there's a lot of people that buy nice cameras that take livestock photos for themselves but don't know the background. Do you think it's vital to learn manual settings and do some of that research that you just talked about, or can you get away with kind of an auto setting type of thing?
Yes and no. And I have had very lengthy discussions with other photographers on this exact topic. Why I like the manual setting the most is because you're in charge of all 3 points of your camera. You're in charge of the ISO, you're in charge of the shutter speed, and you're in charge of the aperture. And in my particular line of work, or our particular line of work, I really like to have my lens cracked wide open. The lower the aperture setting, the better. So a lot of people like, well, just put it in aperture priority mode and go. I'm like, yeah, that's all fine and great until you need to change settings on the fly, and you need to make sure your shutter speed doesn't drop too low and you get motion blur, especially when you're doing like little pigs inside or animals that are walking like bred ewes or cattle. So what I find gets some people into trouble in an auto setting is they're indoors. They use an auto setting, the aperture stays low, but they're going to sacrifice their shutter speed and not their ISO. And then they'll get motion blur. Or those pictures aren't super, super crispy, or, the end product just isn't great. And I'm like, well, why, gosh, why is that happening? And then, when you import the photo, you can kind of see the settings that you shot at. I'm like, well, your shutter speed was too low and you're getting that motion blur. So when you're in manual, you're in full control. So I'll sacrifice ISO any day to make sure I don't have that motion blur. And these new mirrorless cameras are really good workhorses in low light. So it's not as big of a deal as it used to be a few years ago when we were all using just like the sensor cameras. But I would encourage everyone to start or to use manual. But if you're just starting out, aperture priority is a fine way to start. And I think in outdoor settings, it's fine. So kind of start there, move to manual, play around with it, and go from there.
I don't think I mean, it's one of those things that, yeah, it seems daunting when you don't know what you're doing, but a few times of trial and error and having, like, I remember the first time I like printed out the little sheet of like the tricks, and I'm like, okay, this just helps, when you have it right there with you. So it's really not as bad as, but maybe we say that as people that have learned how to do it.
Yeah, I remember in the moment. And this was before, like on the mirrorless now, you can look through the camera and essentially see the photo you're going to take before you take it, which is an amazing feature. But before that, on just the regular cameras, you look through and you didn't know what your end photo would look like until you took it. So you take it and you look at it like, oh my gosh, it's so dark. Why? Like, what am I doing? And you have your livestock ready, everyone's waiting on you, you only get a little bit of time to get pictures of each animal, and you're just like so stressed in the moment. You're just like, why isn't this working? And it's frustrating. In the moment, it seems like it takes an hour, but yeah, it can be really daunting.
You've mentioned it a few different times. Let's talk about gear setup.
Yep.
What do you recommend people when they call you and say, hey, I want to start taking photos? Is there like a novice version and an advanced version with gear?
Yes and no. I think, people just need to start out with what their budget allows. And I think with the whole mirrorless camera setup now, there are tons of really good, just regular DSLR cameras, and a 70 to 200 millimeter lens is available that people can buy fairly cheap and get started and get a really nice product for what they need. But I would definitely, for livestock photography, sale photos, if you're shooting at a show and at a backdrop, I would definitely, three things I would buy would be, a nice camera body, whether that's the DSLR or the mirrorless, and then the 70 to 200 millimeter lens to go with that, because that's what I'm using on all of my sale shoots. Essentially, anytime I'm in a show ring, and you want to make sure that aperture setting can go down fairly low. For me, it's a 2.8. The lower the f-stop, the more expensive the lens is, but I don't see on a zoom lens like that to go any lower than a 2.8. And then the other piece of equipment I keep on me is a 24 to 70 millimeter lens, especially in sheep, and in backdrops too. You're probably going to want to use that shorter lens on a backdrop, but with sheep, a lot of times when I'm shooting the profile shot, I'm using my 70 to 200, and then I actually have a secondary body that I'll switch to when we're doing our rear shots, because that shorter lens allows me to get over the lamb, read top shape, rack shape, and kind of get off them a little bit, just to capture all the essence of, essentially, if you were in the pen with the sheep, looking down at the sheep, I want that photo to be exactly what you would see. Or if you were in a show ring and you were a judge, I want that view to be exactly, you'd see the sheep as you'd reach down and handle it, essentially, to get the best read of that animal. So for me, that's that short lens, the 24 to 70. And those are my three things that I never leave home without.
I love it. It's a
Yeah.
simple, easy setup. And I really appreciate that tip about like being able to, I guess, read the livestock the way you'd see it with your eye when also taking a photo, because I think that can be a missed. Like I've never heard someone say it that way. So that was, I think, a really good piece of advice when it comes to the gear you used. When it comes to editing livestock photos, I guess what is your goal? I know when it comes to portrait photography, there's styles and aesthetic and all these different things. But if you were to just, I know editing's a little bit hard to talk about when it's more of a visual product, but if you're trying to explain this to a beginner about what some of the important things are when you're looking at livestock photography and editing, where would you start?
Sure. My editing regime is really simple. I pretty much use Lightroom Classic for 98% of my editing, and most of that is just color correcting, cropping, and tilting. I cannot hold my camera straight to save my life, so that's a pretty big key for me. But essentially, I want it to look as realistic as possible. I'm a really big fan of true colors, so I want the sheep to be very true to their color, whether they're natural, whether they have a really light fleece, dark fleece, piebald, whatever. I want the nature around it to look very similar. I don't want my greens to be, too green or too saturated or too unsaturated for that matter. So I really want it to be a really like true to color look with that. And then when it comes to editing the specific animal, I love Lightroom because you can use a variety of different masking tools. And I really love the select subject, because then you can really hone in just on that animal, adjust the highlights, the shadowing, the sharpness I do a lot of. So I actually will create a preset just for a subject masking on my basics that I adjust, apply that to the photo, and then adjust from there, because every single lighting situation is different and every single photo can be different within a shoot depending on the day you have. So that's been really great. But as far as that, Photoshop's a super helpful tool for removing, different debris. I really like the Magic Eraser tool. It's probably like my number one used tool in there. And that's about it. So, and then you can, compress the file to whether you're doing it in an online sale, you need a smaller file, or you're making a giant banner, so the person needs a massive file. So pretty simple. Pretty simple editing routine, nothing too fancy.
I have to ask, and you brought it up with Photoshop, there's always this question of what is ethical when it comes to, I don't want to say photoshopping, but that's kind of like a good, there's air quotes for those
Yeah.
that aren't seeing this visually. I guess what's your thought process when it comes to editing additional items?
Yes. I have a very strong stance on this because I come from the photographer that's also raising and selling the animal, right? So my finished product, not only as a photographer, but as a producer of these animals, has to replicate the animal that is being sold 100%. No lies. So when I am editing a photo, there are just times when you do need to use Photoshop, like to fix wool, or like a lot of times with sheep. I know this is another visual that they can't see, but if an ear is flopping and it goes behind the neck and it throws off that line of the neck, I have no moral issue removing that outside ear to make that neck look bigger or like longer, because with the ear there or ear not, the neck is exactly the same. So Photoshop is a super helpful tool. Where I get upset is when I'm scrolling Facebook and I see these lambs and I'm like, how are these lambs not winning Louisville? How there's going to be a million state fair winners. It's going to be so hard. Like, these animals are so perfect, and I know that they have been manipulated, in an editing program, and that it breaks my heart for a couple different reasons, because as a producer, I know how hard it is to make, or how hard it is for my husband and his team and our team to make those animals with those features and those characteristics, right? And for someone to go behind a screen and manipulate that in 5 minutes or less and put that on the internet, it's almost discrediting to the hard work breeders in the industry are actually doing to put these credible, amazing animals, on the market for exhibitors to purchase. Another reason too, not from a breeder perspective, from a purchaser perspective, if I'm looking to buy an animal for me to show, for my daughter to show, and I buy this beautifully manicured photo and I get it home off the trailer and it is not what the photo looks like, I lose faith in this wonderful industry that, we love and that we want to raise our children in too. So it puts a sour taste in everyone's mouth. So I think my biggest thing is, in my own photos and client photos, I assess the animal, I look at the animal. What I turn over as a finished product is a mirror image of what I saw that day. And what helps now is we do a lot of videos, not anything fancy, just literally on a cell phone on a gimbal, like a 360 shot of literally the photo I took, and the photo matches the video. Because if it didn't, we wouldn't sell sheep. I wouldn't have a job as a photographer, and it would really just discredit the livestock industry as a whole, I think.
That was beautiful, very eloquent. I know lots of people have varying opinions, but I think that depending on where you stand, those are some great perspectives to think about. You brought up videoing, and I think that this is a trickier question when it comes to sheep. But as video becomes more popular, what's your guys's, whether this is for Hild Bros or I don't know if you do this with other clients, but what is the process when it comes to providing video of livestock, I guess particularly sheep?
Yeah, so it's very different from cattle. I have this much experience with cattle, and it's very, very, very little. But those cattle, they provide more opportunity to get really good video shots. They're walking, they're plodding along very nicely, and you can get a nice video shot. With these lambs, put them in a pen, they're just going to run into a wall and try to kill themselves. And you will pull your hair out trying to get a professional video, I mean, on your nice camera. So what I've told, what we do at Hild Brothers and when I offer other people's is I just use my iPhone. I put it on a gimbal. I walk around this animal and I literally upload it to Vimeo or YouTube that instant when we're done taking the video. It's nothing special, but it is a good backup to the photo that I'm providing. My other little insight into videoing, especially small lambs, is twofold, because when you're bracing lambs, it's like if you're a bodybuilder and you're flexing all your muscles, right? So when your lamb is up there and you're bracing, that lamb is firing on all cylinders and really showing you like the best parts of that lamb. And then you put that little lamb out in a pen. It's like that bodybuilder takes a deep breath and hunches over and walks around. You're like, ooh, that bodybuilder looks like nothing like that, on the loose, just walking around. Well, yeah, because it's not flexing its muscles. It's not in that stance where like in cattle, they're never bracing and flexing and like doing that. So with little lamb videos, I think it's important, yes, to see how they track their skeletal flow and how they move, because that's also how they're evaluated when they're being shown. But I think, as long as whatever video you're providing backs up the photo is the most important thing. But when you're doing like bred ewes and stuff, they move slower because they're super, super pregnant. But those videos are better because there's more focus on just like, how she looks, her conformation, skeletal flow, all that thing. And they're just easier to get videos of. But for little lambs, if you can provide a decent cell phone video, I think most people are happy with that. And me as a photographer, like, I'm not going to stand there all day and waste my time taking 85 3-second shots of a lamb sprinting across a pen. I think we can all agree that that's super annoying.
I remember the first time I did it and I was like, what is going on? You don't even know what to do. Which that
Yeah,
leads me to actual like taking photos, right? Where we talked a lot about gear and editing and whatnot. What is your ideal picture pen scenario? And maybe we can talk about babies and then bred ewes.
sure. Yes. So when it comes to lambs, on our operation, we picture them between 5 and 7 weeks of age, and that varies breeder to breeder just on care management, animal bloom, and how they're looking, wool length, and all the things. But the sweet spot I find is 5 to 7 weeks of age. And these lambs, and this can kind of roll into like key to a perfect picture day too, is just like have been worked with for weeks ahead of time, just in terms of like being caught up by a human, being braced, getting their head and neck back, being set up. So when it's picture day, it's not like ground zero for that sheep. Like they have been handled, they know the drill. Yeah, they need time and patience because they're animals, but it's not the first time they've been handled. So the more they can be handled, the better the picture day will go. And gosh, we have so many different scenarios. Since for the other day, we pictured 60 head, right? So we've got 3 stands, tons of help and get that sheep ready. And it's not show ring prep by any means. We're just blowing out legs, hacking off some of the long squiggly hairs around the hocks, nothing fancy, getting debris off the bellies, things like that, trimming around the tail heads, and then giving them to the picture holder. And we're rolling. The other key to a good day is having someone on the head of the animal that knows what they're doing. You could have a barn full of the best sheep, but if you do not have a skilled handler setting up your animal, it's not going to do you a lick of good. So you have to have a skilled handler on those animals that can set them up, that can feel, where things need to be, get the head and neck back. And then my job as a photographer is to not only take the picture, but I'm also coaching, because the person holding the sheep doesn't see what I see. So I'm coaching, you know, um, we number our legs on the sheep, and that's kind of how I got my name, for back. So leg one is show side front, 2 show side back, 3 non-show side back, 4 non-show side front. And those sheep, when they're bracing and they're square, on some photos we want that offset leg right in the photo, and they never want to give up that leg forever. So I'm always like, four back, four back. That's just like I scream it all day long. So that's where I actually got my name from, for back. And but yeah, so you have to be able to coach the person. You have to be able to direct the set well, because sometimes what the handler thinks looks good is not going to look good behind a camera. So you have to be able to really coach the person and be like, shake the lamb back, move 3, move 4, belly up, back down. It's just a lot of communication. So you have to be a good communicator. And then you just kind of roll through that, and you have to know when to call it. You have to know when you can get the most out of an animal. Since I don't really do any animal manipulation in Photoshop, I expect those animals to picture perfectly, which is what I ask. So sometimes that might take a little longer to get the shot, but they're little animals, and if they get exhausted or if it takes too long, we'll cycle them back, maybe try them again later, or maybe they're just not ready to be pictured that day. That in a nutshell is kind of what a good picture day looks like. We use, in terms of setup, we put all our lambs on a platform, just mostly so I'm not having to lay on the ground to take the photo. So they're on a platform at a slight angle. We have been using some of those bar mats a little bit so they don't slip on that. I love the green turf that's pretty popular these days. Um, Ideally, we go outside because natural light is just the best. I'm always shooting with the sun behind me at all times, so that picture platform will have to move just depending on where the sun or where we're at in relation to the sun. Recently, we pictured indoors, and I kind of panicked, and we were going to picture Monday, and it was Thursday. And my husband's like, "Why don't we get a backdrop made?" I'm like, "Okay, I'll make a backdrop of the sky." Hung that up. We're inside. I had my light set up, so just depending on where you are in this winter has been very, very brutal. So an indoor setup has been what a lot of what we've done and what a lot of my clients will do in these next couple weeks, just because it's so gross. So
Do you think, well, I should back up. That was very helpful, even as someone who has taken some photos of sheep, not a ton, but walking through that was helpful. But do you think that, I guess multiple things. When you have the sheep on the platform, are you eye level? Like, where does your camera sit relative to the sheep? So, like, if people were building a platform, how high should they be?
yeah, it can be a foot off the ground, 2 feet off the ground. I think ours is a little higher than it's about 2 feet, and that's plenty high because I still will get on a step ladder so I can shoot up over the back of the sheep. The nice part about having a higher platform is when you're outside, it just helps elevate them more so you can get a prettier background and you don't have like that surface level stuff that you're shooting like you're not competing sometimes with horizon lines on top lines. You're kind of getting above that, which I think is a little helpful with the taller platform. But when I'm shooting, my focal point is just right in the middle of their rib cage. I use the center point focus, and it is just right in the middle of that animal. And I'm kind of shooting down just a touch, or I'm right at eye level. Very rarely am I low looking up. I'm really never using that angle.
Okay, so that was perfect because my next question was about backgrounds. Um, what is best case scenario? Nothing behind? What does that look like? And then do you think that it's better to be outside for depth of field versus inside? Like, does it change? I know, like, if weather is dictating things, you don't have a choice. But I know lighting's better outside, but does that also make the animals look better to have nothing behind them versus even a plain backdrop inside?
Yeah, it does. And back to your comment about the depth of field, it's nice when there's nothing behind that animal because I am so far away from that animal in my zoom lens. I am zoomed all the way in. And when you have nothing behind that animal or a long distance behind the animal to the next big thing, that's what blurs your background when you're shooting on that low aperture. Just for those listeners that don't know what we're talking about when we're talking about depth of field and aperture. So if you have something really close to the animal, like say you're in a barn and you're shooting against a wall and you're right on that, even if you're at the lowest aperture your lens will allow, that wall will still be really in focus and not as artsy and pretty. And I think what I love about, my photos is when the animals in an area where the background is really far away, we have that really creamy, artsy, pretty background. It's a pretty photo to look at, right? The sky, maybe some distant trees, like it's nice. So if you're in a situation and you have to shoot inside, my advice would be have some distance between your subject and the backdrop if you're using a backdrop or the wall, because even if it's 5 to 10 feet of separation and you're at a low aperture setting, you'll still create some blur and softness in that photo that will help that photo just elevate the overall look of it, even if you can't give that animal like wide open spaces behind it.
That was helpful. And I also appreciate that perspective because I know when I've done stuff with Peyton, he's only worried about the sheep. And I know that that is the main priority. But it's nice to hear you say that, like, I do think a pretty photo makes it just easier to look at. Similar to like portraits, like you're still trying to draw the eye in to the animal. And if there's things going on or backdrop really close, like, yes, that's not the priority,
Mhm.
but it detracts from the priority, I guess, in my mind.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think this day and age when so many animals are being marketed online and, your newsfeed every day is flooded with photos, you mindlessly scroll and you'll stop on the pretty image, and you'll look like, wow, that's a good photo. Oh, I hate the breeding. Never mind. And you'll just keep scrolling. But what made you stop was the pretty photo. And I think that's how um, many producers can benefit from hiring a professional photographer. Producers can benefit from learning basic photography skills to implement into their operations, or upcoming photographers can learn, they can incorporate their art and their creativity in a sale photo to stop the scroll, to help the producer sell the animal. So I think everyone can benefit just from those basic skills and understanding of, it's not just the sheep on picture day. It's not just the cow on picture day, the pig. It's kind of everything that goes around it as well. So yeah.
That was my next question. And maybe there's, I guess, a few more pieces, but like if I know, especially in the sheep world, a lot of people think you can get by with an iPhone photo because there's less movement, X, Y, and Z. But I guess what's your argument, especially when it comes to paying a premium when you hire someone to take these photos? Which I guess there's still always the option of you just taking them on a nicer camera than an iPhone. But how do you have that conversation with people that are interested of like, why is it worth nice imagery?
Yeah. And I tell people initially when they reach out, and we have that initial conversation about hiring a professional, whether it's me or someone else, value that adds, because what I say is the professional you're hiring has done this before. They're not only bringing gear with them, but they're a wealth of knowledge, age, and help. There's essentially extra help. And then all the photos are the same. They're all cropped the same format. And it's just so much easier for the reader to then have the photos that they can use on the online platforms or to put on their Facebook or their website. And it's just a lot of stuff that they don't have to do after the pictures are taken, I think is another big value added bonus of having a photographer. But also I think people, and you can take a good cell phone photo. I'm not going to knock that one bit, but just to have, and I think it proves to the people you're trying to sell the lambs to, like, hey, we really believe in what we're selling. We've hired a professional to come in, take these photos. We're offering, really good sheep. We've got really good photos. We've really taken the time and the investment, and you should too, right? So then, you know, they're more apt to maybe come look at the sheep on the farm, call with questions, hit bid another couple times, just because like you believe in what you're selling, so they believe in what you're selling is kind of what I say. But sometimes some home photos have to work, and that's fine if that's where you're at. But I think if it works out for you and your scheduling, definitely hire a professional photographer.
That was wonderful. Monica, we've talked about a lot of different things, but if, especially given the timing of the year right now, which this episode is being recorded in January and probably come out in February, but what can people do? Like, what's one thing that people can do as they get ready to picture and sell a ton of baby lambs? I guess, is there like one piece of advice that you'd give people as they're trying to improve?
Are you talking like improve themselves taking the photos, or that they're improve in terms of like hiring someone in to like come like what are we?
I guess maybe either. I guess it probably depends on who you're talking to. But maybe if there's something that a breeder could do to better market their livestock, and then something that a photographer can do to improve the photos that they take.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a breeder standpoint, because I've been in that boat before, is just everything now is pretty much AI. So, the moment you breed these animals, when they're going to be born. So you can market when you're going to have your sales and how you're going to sell them. So I think having a game plan is the number one thing someone that's selling these animals can do. So that's identifying, they're going to be born this date. We're going to want a picture between this and this date. If I'm hiring my photos out, I need to make sure I get on the photographer schedule well ahead of time, so they have time to come in, take the photos. I have adequate turnaround time then to get my photos up on my online sale platform of choice, and to give the world enough time to view my animals, come see them if need be, and eventually buy. So that's a lot of planning. So you need to be organized from the breeder standpoint. And then if you're looking to hire a photographer, the sooner you reach out, the better. I really appreciate when customers come to me, in the fall and they're like, hey, we're going to have a bunch of early Decembers. We're going to want to market them early February. I would really love to get on your schedule end of January. I'm like, great, awesome, cool. I'll block off a few days. We'll touch base once your lambs are on the ground, they're growing well, and we'll schedule you. What I don't appreciate from a photographer standpoint is someone's like, hey, my sale's in 2 weeks. I need my photos. And I'm like, okay, I'm A, booked, and B, even if I'm not, like, we got to go now, get your photos. You have to allow me time to get them edited into you. You're doing yourself a disservice by not being organized. So, and I think from a photographer standpoint, just being very clear with your customers on, this is my schedule. This is what I have open. This is how fast you can expect your photos back, I think is a huge one. And just being really clear on, we're in the Midwest and it is January. Weather changes every hour. And just having a backup plan, whether that's, hey, it's like, for example, this weekend, I'm supposed to shoot and it's going to be a high of 12, and I'm like, can we move these indoors? Do you have a suitable spot? Yes or no? They say yes. Okay, let's get a backdrop made. Let's get this as good as we can for indoors. Or if that's not an option, I need to have room in my schedule and flexibility to reschedule them, because I have to respect that they're on a timeline as well to market these animals, because there is a point in time where pictures are, of animals that are too big, or that sweet spot of selling that age of animal has passed. So, you need to refer them on to a different photographer, or you need to, really try to work with schedules. That's why I don't like running a super tightly booked calendar, because this time of year I have to be able to bend and flex and move people around and also picture all of my own sheep. So it's a lot.
After both of those different tips, I think what I guess I gathered is being a photographer means you need to be skilled. And if you're raising livestock, like having good animals ready for pictures is important. But I think more than anything was the scheduling, organizing. Like there's more that goes into it than just taking the photo and getting the photo back.
Yes. And I also think, too, that's why I think it's so advantageous for breeders. I mean, this is how I got into it, right? Because we didn't have time to schedule something out ahead of time. My husband and I would be like, oh, wow, it's sunny right now. Let's go picture 3 sheep. And we'd run outside and we'd take our photos. And sometimes that's all people can do. So if you have that skill set and that knowledge and that base yourself to do your own photos, that works for you, right? But if you're hiring that external person to come in, you need to have the date set in advance. And you also should hire a couple of people to come in to help you get the animals ready, so you can roll through those pictures and you're not like having to picture, put it back, get one up, get it ready, wait, picture, just kind of roll through it. So it's so much organizing and it is so much planning, but it's worth it.
Which is why I'll throw it out that some of the girls are better at that part than some of the boys that don't value schedules and calendars. But I shouldn't say all. Okay, Monica, I have a few final questions for you that I've kind of like to ask everyone. So the first, what does it mean to you to cultivate a skill or talent or profession?
Sure. To me, cultivating a skill, a talent, or profession, especially in my situation, is something that serves me as well as I can help serve others. Like, my path in photography stemmed from a true business need in my own life that we needed to do, and I ended up really, really, really liking it. So I cultivated those skill sets, became really good at it, and then I was able to offer that skill set that I really did enjoy doing, to other people, other producers, other photographers, in terms of like them wanting to learn and excel. And it has helped build just a strong community of people in my life, in terms of the other creatives such as yourself that I've gotten to connect with down this road, and other photographers and other breeders now that I truly consider friends, that just go beyond taking their pictures and beyond the creative space. So just kind of cultivating is grown outside of my realm of photography and being a creative, which is is super nice. And I think, like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, we're helping that next batch of people coming up. We're giving them tricks that, we didn't have available when we started to help them excel faster and sooner. And, there's space for everyone in this industry. And we're just cultivating that kindness and support for all the other people that are just, coming up in the spaces around us as well.
That's beautiful. I love that. Do you have any book and or podcast recommendations?
I will be the first to admit I don't read a lot.
Most
But
people
I
don't.
recently read one. It was called While You Were Out by Meg Kissinger, I believe. And it's nonfiction, and it actually talks about mental health in like the 1950s. She comes from a very big Catholic family, and the mental health stigma was so wildly suppressed, right? So if you were suffering from any type of depression or suicidal thoughts, it was so sinful you didn't talk about it. And it's just wild that was not that long ago. That was like our parents' age. So to read that and to read these true stories of these people's lives and know that that wasn't that long ago, and that's literally our parents' age, it's just wild. So if you're into that kind of nonfiction reading, I really did enjoy that. It was a really easy read. Not easy read, but it gave you a lot to think about. It's wild. But what about you? Any good book recommendations on your end? Because I need to read more.
I mean, yes and no. I try to read. I read my like self-help learning stuff in the morning when my brain is awake. I'm reading a financial book right now, but in the evenings I read the fun stuff to like calm the brain down. Um, and I've read a couple from Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think is her full name, and those are fun, easy reads. Um, I don't know the whole basis, but I think they're like a somewhat based off of a true story, but she adds and does some fun things. So that would be a fun one, or there, she has lots of them, so it'd be a fun one to look into.
Yeah, I'll look into those. Thanks for the suggestion.
Yes. Okay. Final question. And I know we've talked about a lot, so this is an open book, but what's one final piece of advice that you would give to photographers, to creatives in the industry trying to grow and get better?
Sure. The advice I give to specifically like livestock photographers and creatives in our space would be to, like we talked about, know your skill in terms of your gear, but also learn how to evaluate the stock that you are taking pictures of, because when you're taking the photos, you're directing the set, you're ultimately deciding what the best angle, sellable angle is for the animal, right? So having a basic understanding of the showmanship, good structure, muscling, balance, structural correctness, breed and sex characteristics, that's all going to help you excel in whatever avenue of photography you are trying to go down. So I always like to tell people photography and agronomy, right? You're not going to go out and take a picture of like a really ugly corn plant. You want to know as an agronomist what a really healthy corn plant looks like, right? So as any type of livestock photographer, you want to know what the most sellable angle is for that animal, for that age of animal, for that breed of animal, for that sex of animal, right? So I know sometimes people get really caught up in the trendy shots that you see in the show ring. That doesn't translate to a sales shot, right? So sometimes you have to maybe put artistic aside a little bit and harness your livestock evaluator brain and get the shot right, and know that not every animal is going to be a cookie cutter for every style of photo. So you have to be adaptive to the situation you're in. Like, I'm not going to shoot bred ewes the same way I shoot lambs, and I'm not going to shoot goats the same way I shoot sheep. So just having that Swiss Army knife of knowledge of how to evaluate those animals when you get there, I think is going to help the photographer, right? So you're going to excel in both areas. So photography and, digital design. So, if you're doing the digital design, dabble into that a little bit. What are your customers wanting? What's going to sell? What are they going to hang up at their show pens in their barns, etc. Photography and try to hone in on skills that are beneficial to both your photography and your and.
I think that was a beautiful way to end this conversation. Monica, thank you so much. If people want to learn more from you, see your work, see what you're up to, where can people find you?
Sure. I am on Instagram for back photo. I really love to post all of my behind the scenes stuff back there, as well as livestock photos and I'm starting to gear up for busy season. So there'll be a lot on there. I also have a Facebook page for back photography, as well as a website, and that's www.forbackphotography.com. So there is where you can find me.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica, so much.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. It was a great time talking.